you need to know one of the luckiest actors you'll ever meet in your life. And I want no rude remarks about dwarves and elves and things like that. I get very upset when people attack we dwarves. All right, now, first of all, before we kick off, I want to talk about something that sort of has been bubbling in the back of my mind for a while and was sort of crystallized yesterday when a teacher came up to me. He teaches in the northern part of the territory, and if I got it right, his school has had 8 child suicides. This is appalling. And I want to try a different approach. I'm not saying it would work, but at least we need to try a different approach. I think that if we try to explain to teenage children really what is happening, then they might understand the mechanics of their unhappiness. Now, some of you are real scientists and some of you are real doctors here. If I am wildly wrong, you are more than welcome to correct me. But as I understand it, when the adolescent growth spurt starts, all the bones of the body grow, including the skull. And suddenly the brain has to adapt to fit this new, bigger box. And it grows a little bit, but it actually physically changes shape and moves. And this doesn't happen overnight. In fact, now we believe that it's not finally over until somewhere between the age of 24 and 26. That means that being a teenager lasts a lot longer than we ever thought it was. When they do scans of teenage girls, for instance, and compare them to adult psychopathic women, there is apparently no difference in the two. All I'm saying is that actually childhood ends with adolescence, and adolescence is a period of insanity between childhood and being grown up. Because as the brain is moving, and that's such a clumsy and inappropriate term, really, but as the brain is adapting to fit this new big box, it doesn't happen proportionally. Some little bit goes, and then another little bit goes. And the last 2 areas that enter into their adult state are the prefrontal cortex, which has to do with judgment and a sense of proportion, and a very primitive area of the brain called the amygdala, which is the seat of raw emotions: fear, rage, despair, anger, murder, suicide. And they're the last 2 areas that get in there. So there is no point in telling a 15-year-old boy that he has no judgment whatsoever because he has chosen for a dare to jump off the Golden Gate Bridge. This actually happened, and survived. In truth, he doesn't have judgment. He is not capable of making judgment. The mechanism is not in place. And likewise, the filter for emotions isn't in place. If you said to me now, John, you've got a very big nose, I would say, yeah, well, lucky me. When somebody said that to me when I was a teenager, you've got a big nose, I went around for days trying to make my nose small, because I didn't have the mechanism in place to defend my feeling of of inadequacy. I wasn't able to protect myself. There isn't the protective mechanism there. And that's what I think is happening to teenagers. They get into I still remember that time I shyly asked that girl if she would come to the cinema with me, and she laughed and ran away. And I knew my life was over. You know, I knew that I was so unattractive, and the pimples didn't help, that no one would ever love me, and, you know, I might as well give up now. And that's what happens when you're a teenager. And there is no point, if you're a lunatic teenager, in talking to your friends and asking them for advice, because they're nuts too. And perhaps if we try to explain what I have, in a rather clumsy way, tried to explain now to teenage children, and urge them to talk to even their parents who might know something, but particularly to grown-ups. You know, if they are unhappy and they are in despair, they should know that that despair and that feeling they have is more intense than it reasonably should be, because they have no protection in their way. Because mechanically the brain is doing strange things and they have no protection there. And perhaps if we explained it to them that way, they might actually think, I'm like this. I mean, I talked to a boy the other day at a convention, and he was saying, he was 14, and he said, I just feel that I'm empty inside. You know, that's a dangerous symptom. And yet I suspect if we thought back, we might recognize that boy ourselves. That's one thing. The other thing is, I'm sorry, I am your grandfather, and I take the opportunity to remind you of it. That movement and adaptation of the brain to fit the bigger box is laid down in your DNA. And the DNA programming creates a cascade of consequential reactions right at the cellular level. Now, when you interfere with a sequential series of reactions, the earlier you introduce error, the greater the error becomes. And that's why cannabis is an absolute no-no, especially for children. And by children now, we're talking at least 18, 20 plus. And there's something in New Zealand called the Dunedin Longitudinal Experiment. They took about 1,000 children born in the Dunedin area in 1971-72, and they have applied every matrix of examination that they possibly can to them every 2 years, and they have a 97% rate of retention, which is extraordinary. Now these children are in their 30s, and the consequences of certain things are becoming inevitable. If all the adults in this room took up wacky tobacco now, we might measure a drop in our intelligence. It might only be 1 or 2 IQ points. But if we gave it up, it would bounce back up again. The consequences of taking marijuana, and some of them were having exposure to it at the age of 8, 9, 10, is a 10 to 12 point reduction in IQ. And it's permanent. Once